They've got a modular.
Commissioners, we're going to start up with item number 14, which is an application for a certificate of appropriateness in the Borough of Manhattan, docket number 15-6223, block 15, lot 22, 21 West Street, the 21 West Street building and individual landmark, an Art Deco-style office building designed by Starrett and Van Vleck and built in 1929 to 30, and the application is to install a removable flood mitigation system.
Good afternoon, Commissioners. Ryan Walsh, Preservation Department staff. The subject premises is located just north of Battery Park, and with facades fronting Morris Street, Washington Street, and West Street. And the application, like what was mentioned, is to install a flood mitigation system. And essentially, what you're going to have here is a barrier that runs along this facade on Washington Street, this facade on Morris Street, and it'll wrap around onto West Street. And the reason that we have this big mock-up here is because the way that the system attaches is there are a number of uprights, and they have to attach, or they're proposing to attach to the structural pillars of the building. And the way that they're going to mitigate kind of the appearance is to use these kind of sacrificial inserts of the historic material. So essentially what will happen when a flood is imminent, they will come in here, they'll drill out these little inserts, they'll attach the uprights, and then the flood system will go in. When they remove it, then they will refill the holes. So, Edward Donnelly is going to present more in detail the presentation. Pass this over to you.
Thank you. Good afternoon, Commissioners. Thank you for seeing us today. My name is Edward Donnelly from Rose Associates. I represent the owner of the building. And as Ryan so aptly described, as a result of the Hurricane Sandy events, we looked to preserve the interior of the building, which was devastated as a result of the floods that occurred during that event. 21 West Street is the landmark building, and as you can see, our lobby was preserved, and we maintain the artistic intent of the building. The location, as Ryan dictated, is between West Street, Morris, and Washington Streets. And with the prior flood mapping, the building was in a flood zone, but now, as a result of Hurricane Sandy, as some of you may know, FEMA is reinstituting or reinitiating the flood maps. They've revised the flood maps, and they've added 21 West Street as both a velocity and flood zone. And what we experienced during that event was a tremendous amount of damage in a short period of time. And what occurred was when the floodwaters rose and overtook the building, they came in from multiple angles on the facade of the entrance of the building, the exposed sides. And because of that velocity, it just inundated the first floor of the building with water and literally destroyed the building. So we have two images here of what occurred. During the flood, you can see the amount of water that came into the lobby, flooded the elevator pits. There was over 3 feet of water at its height in the building. You can see it devastated the fitness center that is on the first floor as well. We suffered approximately or more in excess of $3 million in damages. The residents of the building were displaced for about 17 days. We have multiple families in the building, and no one could come back in the building until we had it cleared by the Department of Buildings as being able to return back to the building. You can see when the event occurred, when it started, there were protection measures that were instituted. They were unable to stem the flood. You can see it starting to come into the building, and then the waters just took over any of the openings in the building and then started to rush into the lobby. So after a certain point, it was moved to try to stop the water. And then it just started to rise throughout the interior of the building. And there at its height, you can see all of the water that came in. And to compound matters, some of our neighboring buildings also were inundated with water. And because of the garage that's across the street, the cars that were in the street, and our neighboring building, which had an oil tank, which was then uprooted, the water was contaminated. So not only did we have water that came into the building, the water was contaminated. So there again, just to give you kind of a before and after, that was in the height of the damage and devastation, and that's our lobby. If you were to go there today, that's our beautiful lobby, and that's what we're really looking to preserve. So again, you see the before and after. So immediately after the event, and just so you can see the line of damage on the exterior of the building, that's the height that the waters had risen to. So then we looked for a system that would protect the building, that would allow us to preserve the architectural intent of the building while also stemming that kind of devastation. So there are several products out on the market that we looked at. We put some extensive work in trying to determine the right product for the building as well as the right mounting system. So we went through several iterations of how we were going to assemble the system and attach it to the building. So these images are of the product, which is in front of you here as well, that we had ultimately decided upon. And this system is designed such that on any normal day like today, that system lays in wait in a storage area in the building, and if we were to get any indication of a storm, such as a hurricane warning, so we have at least 24 to 48 hours to assemble a system, we could then take it out onto the sidewalk, use the building's existing structure, and attach the system. So the method that we had ultimately decided upon was to install the system proud of the columns that you see here. So 21 West Street, if you're familiar with the building or if you have a chance to review the building after this meeting, has essentially an interior walkway. Those columns are proud of the inset entrance of the building. So there's an approximate 5-6 foot, there's 6 feet between the facade and the outside of the column. So initially when we were entertaining the idea of putting up a flood mitigation system, we initially had thought to go to the building itself, but that presented a couple of problems and situations that we thought would not suit the building, its facade, or the architectural intent, or the mechanical systems best. So there are standpipe fittings, there are Siamese connections, there are some other mechanical fittings that are immediately on that facade. So we decided to mount the system as you see it here. This is a Photoshop image of what it will look like, and so we're relying on the structural integrity of the columns and what's behind the masonry to attach the system, and also create essentially what would be akin to like a reverse moat. So we'll have a dry area, a dead zone, in between floodwaters and the interior of the building. So if there was an event and water did get past this system, and this system is claimed to be approximately 98% watertight. So if there's any water that did get past there, we'd still have the ability to try to mitigate or relieve that from getting to the interior of the building. So here's some details of how we would attach the system to the building. So that's where the mock-up, these nice friendly mock-ups come in. We had devised a system, we worked with the manufacturer to create a system that was modified from their original design, which had multiple points of connection. We limited the points of connection. We worked with a structural engineer, our own architect, and devised a system that had 6 connection points at the center of the column that would go through the masonry, through a knockout, and attach to the structural steel of the building. So if there was an event and we started to assemble the system, we would go to these columns, which will already have the attachment system attached to the steel, and they will have a knockout very similar to this, or a sample. We will have blocks that are already cored, and behind the cores are the connection points for the system. And so we will remove the knockouts, we will assemble the system, lock it down, make it watertight, essentially claim the building as both evacuated and fully assembled. And when the event, should we ever have one again, conclude, we can then disassemble the system and essentially put the cores back into the masonry components, and for all intents and purposes, the building will look just as it did before the event occurred. And so here is photo images of what a column looks like today on site, and what a column, this is actually just a photo of the mock-up that you see. So we did our best to really preserve the visual appearance of the columns through this design methodology. And so we're satisfied that it both preserves the structural intent of the building, it allows us to attach the system in a structurally sound way, and then most importantly, we preserve the appearance of the building because this is a flagship of Rose Associates, and so it was uniquely critical to ownership to preserve the intent of the building and the design.
What holds those little dowels in place?
I'm sorry?
What holds those little cords in place?
They'll be grouted in place, so there'll be a little grout base.
And then how do you get them out after you've routed them?
Just kind of knock them out with a hammer and chisel.
Do the knockouts, clearly the knockouts aren't coming from the background block. You're getting the knockouts from somewhere else. Is it possible to match more closely the piece that each knockout is going into?
It is possible. We have ample attic supply, attic stock in the building of this brick, as you see here, and as we've made the mock-up with. So that is the intent.
Is that the size that will be, is that the actual size that you got there? And how many will there be totally? I understand 6 per column, right?
6
So
per
how many-
column, and
My name is Abraham Block. I'm the architect of records.
Yeah.
There are 19 columns, freestanding columns on the arcade, and there are 2 corner points. Each one of them will have 6 connectors. So there's a total of 114 unit connectors.
So on a column like this is the base of a
Yeah,
column.
there-
So
you
you
can't
have
see it
2 on
from
this
here.
side,
And there's 6
and
of
that's
them.
it, right?
Yeah.
You just have 2 on that side.
Yes, there's 6 on
Six.
each column.
There are
You
6, you
can-
can see
you-
6 in that column there.
Oh,
two in the
really?
brick.
You can see it in the mock-up. You
Yeah,
see,
yeah,
you see that?
yeah, yeah.
Well, it's good if you can see it.
Yes.
I can
You
see
got it.
4.
You have it in here. There's,
Okay.
it's in the book.
Fine, so there's 6
In
on
the
there.
stone.
Uh-huh. Oh, I didn't see that.
see. You're putting this on the outbound side of the colonnade. Is it possible to put it on the inbound side of the colonnade?
we did entertain that option. However, if we were to put it on the inside, we would then have to devise an additional structural support system. So when the water would, for all intents and purposes, hit it, you need to bolster it from the backside.
All right.
So we thought that the columns presented a unique opportunity to utilize the strength of the structure.
So then, when you flooded last time, all of the water came from outside the building. You didn't have anything coming up from cavities, from cellars, from...
The building's on grade. I mean, there were some points of entry in different locations, but nothing to the magnitude. They certainly would have been manageable for the building, but no, the lion's share came in through the openings of the fenestration.
Any other questions? Any other questions? All right. Read the Community Board's resolution. Community Board 1 recommends the Landmarks Preservation Commission approve the application. Right, we'll take public testimony. Kelly Carroll?
Good afternoon, and I wanted to welcome new Chair Srinivasan. I'm Kelly Carroll. I'm also in a new role. I'm the Director of Preservation for the Historic Districts Council. Unfortunately, Hurricane Sandy revealed that the vulnerability of our historic buildings to flooding in Lower Manhattan. HDC is pleased that aesthetics were a priority in safeguarding this individual landmark from water infiltration, as the flood mitigation mounting system is unobtrusive in design. We appreciate that flood panels are removable and therefore not a permanent interruption to the base of this handsome Jazz-Age skyscraper. Thank you.
Thank you. Are there any other speakers? No other speakers. We can go into, any other questions for the applicant? All right, we can go into discussion. I think it's a very subtle response, and I think it has a very important function to preserve other parts of this landmark building as well, so including the lobby, and I think we should support this. Any concerns at all? Okay. All right, so make a motion to close.
Second?
All in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? Okay, Michael, would you like to read it?
Regarding 21
21 West Street, an individual landmark. The application is to install a removable flood mitigation system. I recommend approval, finding that the building sits within the 100-year floodplain and was previously flooded, making it highly vulnerable to water infiltration and damage, thus necessitating an effective water mitigation system. The temporary flood barrier panels and supports are removable and require minimal attachment points to the columns at the arcade and the sidewalk and at the base of the building. The damage to historic fabric caused by the embedded attachment points is minimal, with the number of attachment points limited to 6 small holes per column face. That by matching the historic fabric, the sacrificial plugs will have an unobtrusive presence and not call undue attention to themselves. That the steel anchor plates will be set within plain concrete sidewalk, partially within the property line of the building, and therefore will not damage any historic paving material or otherwise detract from this building. That the existing sidewalk furniture and manholes will minimize the visual impact of the steel plates on the streetscape and not have a negative impact on the overall perception of this large building. That the proposed flood mitigation system will aid in the long-term preservation of the building.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? Okay, this motion is passed.
Thank you very much.